Hello everybody and welcome back to our next instalment of Kick by Mitch Johnson. So if you remember, last time we left, Buddy had got himself into a bit of trouble. He'd kicked a ball into the dragon's house and they'd asked for him to pinch a pair of football boots. So let's see what happens next. The chapter's called Only Believe. The next day is Sunday, so the factory's closed and everybody gets a day off. I wake up early with a watery feeling in my stomach. It's still dark, but no matter how many times I toss and turn, I can't get back to sleep. So I decide to get up and head to the latrine round the back of the block. Normally, there is a queue to use the toilet in the morning, but if you get up early enough on a Sunday, you can walk straight in. I lock the door, drop my shorts and squat over the hole. The little shed is always like an oven, even in the early morning, and the smell is sharp enough to make you stop breathing. Tiny insects crowd around the dim bulb overhead, but it's quiet, and as I squat, I have plenty of time to think. I know that, despite Rochi's warning, I've got no choice but to steal the boots. The only question is how I should go about it. Once I saw a film at Rochi's called The Heist Bandits. It was about this team of thieves who tried to rob a bank. The first thing they did was draw a plan of a building and mark out its weaknesses. Admittedly, they did it on a computer, not in the dust on the toilet floor. But I don't know anyone with a computer that makes maps, or anyone with a computer at all. I pick up a chunk of wood that's fallen from the door frame and trace an outline of the factory in the dust between my feet. I draw crosses for doors and lines to show where the rows of workstations are. Then I draw a stick figure with an angry face outside the foreman's office. After the shoes have been boxed, they are stacked up on a trolley and wheeled into a high, dusty area at the back of the factory, ready to be loaded onto a container truck. The room is full of wooden pallets and tall rolls of plastic for wrapping the shoebox towers, so it's perfect for hiding in. The problem is that you always need an escape plan, and the only way out is through a big shutter that needs two men to haul it open using the chains on either side. And even if I could get through it, the fence compound behind is always locked. My only option would be to steal the boots, cross the factory floor and leave through the staff exit at the front. This would arouse suspicion. And if there's one thing I learned from the Heist Bandits, other than how to draw maps and that you always need an escape plan, it's that you don't want to arouse suspicion. When the robbers aroused suspicion in the film, most of them ended up being killed. Obviously, I want to avoid making the same mistakes. My only hope is that I'll be able to use the confusion of everyone leaving at the end of the day to slip into the loading room. Then, when I've got the boots, sneak out while the foreman is in his office. Looking at the map for a final time, I scuff it with my feet to destroy the evidence and head back to the apartment. As I come through the door, I hear Grandma coughing quietly. But it's so dark that I can't tell whether she's asleep or not. Her head is slumped forward onto her chest, but I shake her arm. She jolts upright and lets out a little cry. "Who is it?" she asks. "Who's there?" "It's okay, Grandma," I whisper. It's me, Buddy. Are you all right?" "Oh, yes, dear. You gave me a bit of a shock. What's the matter?" "I can't sleep," I say, sitting on the rug next to her feet. In the dark, I hear Grandma fumbling with something in her lap, and a few moments later a match throws white light onto everything. Grandma lifts the flame to a cigarette between her lips and shakes the match out, dropping it into the ashtray on the arm of her chair. The tip of her cigarette glows in the darkness, and when she takes a drag, Her face appears in an orange light before disappearing again. Grandma, will you tell me a story, please? Of course, she says in a low voice. What kind of story would you like? How about one where someone gets into trouble but gets out of it again? Grandma's orange face appears again, and she looks at me in a strange way. Okay, I have just the story. Are you sitting comfortably? Yes. Then I'll begin. There once was a boy who lived on one of the many islands in Indonesia. It was only a small island, but it was home to one of the biggest palm trees ever known. For some reason, this tree had kept growing and growing, high above all the others, and its leaves stood many metres above the canopy. The fishermen used to remark on its height from their boats out at sea. Grandma pauses for a few seconds. Her face appears in the light of the cigarette. I smell the smokiness of her breath as she exhales. The people believe that a giant used to inhabit the island in ancient times, and this was the tree from which he ate. It was thought that anyone who could pluck a coconut from the top of the trunk would receive great health and strength. This didn't work with the coconuts that fell from the tree. They lost all their powers upon hitting the sand. Now, the children of the island, as you might well imagine, were very fond of this legend. They were also quite adept at climbing palm trees. They used to wrap a rag around the base, straddle the trunk, and shimmy up in no time. However, in all the history of the island, no one had ever climbed this magnificent tree. Most thought it was simply impossible. Many had tried, of course, but as soon as they passed the tops of the other trees, they would lose their nerve and climb down. They knew all too well that anyone who fell from such a height would certainly be killed. This is where the boy I mentioned at the beginning comes in. Grandma takes another drag, and even after her face disappears, I keep staring at the blackness that replaces it. One day, when all the fishermen were out in their boats, the boy decided to attempt the climb. His friends had been challenging him all morning, and finally he gave in and agreed to it. At first his friends shouted lots of encouragement, but as the boy climbed higher and higher, they fell silent in amazement. The boy himself was terrified, and as he moved above the other trees, the trunk began to sway dangerously. But he faced his fears, kept climbing, and eventually reached the top. All of his friends clapped and they cheered and they shouted at him to climb down, but the boy was too frightened and refused to budge. By this time, many of the villagers had been drawn to the scene by all the noise, but no one could think of a way down to get the boy down. They could hardly climb up and fetch him, could they? If he jumped, the fall would kill him, and to cut down such a majestic tree was unthinkable. Eventually, someone suggested calling the fishermen in. They could tie their fishing nets between the tree trunks and make a safety net. So that's what they did. The villagers created a net and angled it towards the sea, so that when the boy bounced, he would land safely in the water. However, the boy still did not want to let go of the trunk. The sun was starting to set, and the villagers began to worry that the boy would stay up there overnight, and if he became exhausted, he would fall from the tree and miss the net altogether. Then the boy's best friend had a brilliant idea. He told everyone to be quiet and called up to the boy. Grandma takes a final drag and crushes the cigarette in the ashtray beside her. What did he say? I ask. He said, you have to pick one of the coconuts and break it open against a tree. The water will give you special powers. Even if you miss the net, the fall won't harm you." So the boy, clinging on tightly with his legs and one arm, reached out and picked a coconut. He began hitting it against the trunk, and all the villagers below ran for cover as it started raining coconuts. A coconut falling from that height is a very dangerous thing. Only the boy's best friend remained, and he stood beneath the net as all the coconuts landed harmlessly around him. Finally, the boy managed to split the coconut. He lifted it above his face and let the trickle of water fall into his mouth. And do you know something? It was the most delicious coconut he'd ever tasted. The water was so sweet and flavoursome and refreshing. When he had finished the last drop, he felt strong and fearless, like a giant. From far below, he heard his best friend calling up to him, "You can do it! You can fly!" But Grandma, surely that was just a myth. The coconut didn't really give him special powers, did it? Well, listen to the end of the story and you can decide for yourself. The boy looked down from his perch and saw his friend waiting below the net. Suddenly, it didn't seem like such a long way down. Still holding onto the coconut, the boy got himself into a crouching position among the leaves. For the first time, he actually looked around, and he was amazed by what he could see. There were islands in the distance that he'd never even heard of, and the ocean stretched out away to the horizon in every direction. Everything seemed so quiet, and he was able to think very clearly. Then he took a deep breath and leaped into the air. Grandma stops talking, and I hear her slow breathing in the darkness. "Then what happened?" I asked, struggling to control my voice. The boy plummeted down and landed in the centre of the net, which catapulted him over the beach and into the warm waters beyond. When he resurfaced, he held the coconut high above his head, and all the islanders rushed onto the beach, shouting and cheering. So you see, his best friend was right. He could fly. "That's not flying, Grandma. He just fell out of a tree and got a lucky bounce." "Don't be so sure, buddy. The coconut did give him a special power, belief. Without belief, he would never have been able to jump from the tree. Before you achieve something, you have to believe you can do it." Grandma coughs quietly like a low growl. I get up and feel my way to the kitchen to fetch a cup of water. "Thank you, dear," she says after she's taken a sip. "So, did you enjoy your story?" I coil the rug tassels around my finger while I think about it. "Yes, Grandma, but I won't be climbing any trees from now on." "No, you must climb trees. The taller the better. If no one took any risks, everyone would be doing the same thing forever. And how boring would that be?" Besides, the boy reached the top and got down safely. But only because of his friend. Exactly. Sometimes you have to rely on the ones you love to help you out of a sticky situation. Without his best friend, the boy might still be clinging on for dear life to this day. I still think Mum wouldn't be very happy if she found out I'd been stuck up a tree all day. "That's true," Grandma says, chuckle coughing. "She would worry, but you mustn't be afraid of making mistakes. It's good to make mistakes." If the boy hadn't got stuck at the top of the tree, he would never have become aware of all those other islands beyond his own. Climbing that tree, although it was terrifying, opened his eyes to the world around him. He realised that his own island was part of a lot of islands, and that his island was probably a small part of a much larger community. And do you know what? He was right. Indonesia is made up of thousands of islands. Some say as many as 17,000. And before he climbed that tree, he only knew about his one. Can you guess what he did when he grew up? No, Grandma. What did he do? He repaired one of the old fishing boats that had been damaged in a storm and set off with his best friend to explore the other islands. Some of them were very small and uninhabited. So small you could run a lap of the beach in just a couple of minutes. Others were much bigger and home to unfamiliar plants and animals. Some of them were similar to his own island, except for little differences. And of course, none of them had a palm tree as tall as the one he climbed as a boy. Every so often, he would return to his own village and tell the people about his discoveries. To them, he was a hero. They welcomed his return with feasts and dancing, and all because, once upon a time, he'd been too scared to move. We sit silently in the dark for a few moments. Outside, a cat howls. Grandma, is that a true story? Of course it is. Do you think I would just make these things up on the spot? I've lived for a long time, you know, and I've heard a great many tales. That story is far from being the strangest. Will you tell me another one? Maybe in the morning. It's still night time, and I need my beauty sleep. Sweet dreams, Buddy. Good night, Grandma. I kiss Grandma on the cheek and go back to my room. I don't feel tired, but the next time I open my eyes, the room is light and Mum is calling me for breakfast.